Welcome back to the Tara Palmeri Show. Is Texas the white whale for Democrats? They just spend so much money on this state and they never seem to win. Okay, let's go back to 2018 when they spent $80 million on Beto O'Rourke's race against Ted Cruz and he still lost. At the time, that was the most money that was ever spent on a Senate race. In 2024, the party spent $90 million on Colin Allred's race against Ted Cruz, and he lost by 8 points. Some would argue that the money should be used in battleground states. After all, the Democrats haven't won Texas since 1994 when Ann Richards was governor, and then George W. Bush followed her. But maybe this year is different. Senate Majority Leader John Thune has a new poll out, and it is pretty troubling for the Republican Party. The Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, he wants to take on the incumbent Senator John Cornyn in the 2026 midterm elections, and it's not looking good for Cornyn. If Ken Paxton takes on Cornyn, he beats him by more than 10 points according to this poll. But Ken Paxton is a problematic figure. His own party attempted to impeach him, citing patterns of alleged misconduct in lawmaking. The guy has multiple felony indictments for securities fraud. Not exactly the type of candidate you want to put forward. In that same poll that was conducted by Republican leadership, they're assuming that Paxton will be up against my next guest, Colin Allred, that he would be the Democratic nominee. And in that case, Paxton would lose to Allred by 1 point. It's like the Carrie Lake effect in Arizona. You remember Carrie Lake. She ran for Senate in the last election and governor in the election before that. And she lost every time, despite the fact that the primary voters love her. They're rabid for her. She's MAGA hardcore, but she's a little too kooky for the general election voter. So the Republicans basically handed a Senate seat to Democrat Ruben Gallego. He won by default. Now, I talked to Allred about this, and he sounds like a politician ready to announce. You know, he said he has to talk to his wife and children.
And I'm enjoying raising my two boys, who are 4 and 6, and spending a lot of time with my family. And so I'll be making a decision this summer.
I've heard that one before. In the meantime, though, he has some harsh words for the Democratic Party.
Don't get me started on the DNC.
Oh, really? The former NFL player also has some advice for how the party should talk to these young men that they keep losing to Republicans, like the ones that he used to speak to in the locker room. Take a listen here. Colin, thanks so much for joining the show. We're glad to have you here. Just want to make it known up front that we've also invited your former rival, Ted Cruz, on the show. We are awaiting his response. It's been a few weeks. Ted, we're here for you. We know you're busy with a radio show and a podcast yourself, but we're always happy to do a home and home.
Yeah,
So.
well, I'm glad to be here. I know Ted's not busy legislating, so there's that.
Yeah. So you and Ted, you came pretty close to him in this past election. I'm sure you've had a lot of thoughts about it and how it went. I mean, just right now, like any regrets or thoughts about how it could have went differently or issues you would have focused on?
Well, listen, you always have things that you would do differently. I'm an old football player. I've lost a lot of games and I've come back and had wins. And sometimes you learn more in losses. But what I think we saw in the last election was a lot of what was happening at the presidential level, was just consuming so much. And what I think we're dealing with here in Texas and have been dealing with is an ongoing, affordability crisis and an issue with working folks. I understand this implicitly because I was raised by a single mom. You're here in Dallas, grew up struggling. And many of the folks who were most impacted by that, we saw, didn't come out and vote in the election. And I think that's something that, I as a candidate have to better address and talk about how we can, what we want to do to make sure that we're helping folks. We have to point out that they're doing nothing right now to try and lower costs. In fact, they're raising your costs. They're going to try and pass a tax cut for the rich and take away health care from 9 million folks. That's what's going on right now. But certainly, I think that there were a lot of factors at play. And I think that what we're seeing is that some of the promises that were made in that election about being laser focused on the economy, trying to help working families, has been the exact opposite of what they've been spending their time on.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to talk about that. Your campaign back in, it was only less than a year ago, but have you thought about just your position on the border and immigration and what you focus on? I mean, you did focus a lot on reproductive rights. It seemed like that topic didn't really resonate as much. And then you see, looking back on the election that the South Texas region, which used to be a Democratic stronghold, it went for Trump. I mean, like, how do you explain that? Do you think that the messaging should have been stronger on the border? Do you think that, do you look at this as an issue that the Biden administration should have taken more seriously? Do you look back at your own messaging and think, you know what, maybe I should have said that the border needed to be sealed up? Because clearly President Trump has done it. I mean, it's kind of remarkable. I've heard from friends who've been there, it's completely desolate.
Well, listen, I think you have to separate the two races, because I did talk about the border a lot. My family's from Brownsville, the very tip of Texas, on the southern border, where my grandfather was a customs officer. I significantly outperformed the presidential ticket down there. In fact, in one county, Duval County, I think I outperformed Kamala by 17 points, right? And so there's only so much that you can do when you're, I think we had a failure at the presidential level, and I will agree there, to address what was happening. And I was saying for months, in Congress and during my campaign, that we as a party need to talk more and have more of a proactive plan about dealing with what was happening at the border. And we did eventually see some changes made, and some of those changes have continued, but it was way too late, and it was done in an election year. And that was something I was, kind of ringing the bell for some time. But what I will say is that there is a medium ground between what, this kind of, the lack of approach and urgency that we had under President Biden. And now this just entire lockdown, sending people to El Salvador with no due process. There is a middle position that makes more sense for a state like Texas. One where you do have a secure border, but you recognize that our cross-border trade with Mexico, who's our largest trading partner, is incredibly important. That we have a lot of cross-cultural contacts with our neighbors in Mexico. That we can both take care of making sure that when people come here, that not everybody's going to be able to stay, but that we do have due process and treat people humanely. That's our values as Americans that we have to pursue. And so I think we have to chart a middle ground. And that's what I proposed during the campaign. I think that's probably why you saw me outperform so significantly our presidential ticket in South Texas. But as a party, I think you have to say that we failed in the last election to make people feel like we were going to do anything about it.
Right. I mean, back in 2018, you called Trump's proposed border wall racist. And you said you would be the generation that would tear it down. Last year, you said you supported Biden's plan to extend the border wall. What made you change that position?
Well, I was always talking about the iconography and using terms to be exclusive to people. I wasn't talking about actual border security. And there is a difference. Having physical barriers in conjunction with hiring more Border Patrol agents, with hiring more immigration judges, with being able to process folks who are seeking asylum much faster, that's smart border security. And that's what I was advocating for. But trying to have a symbol that you are then trying to, I think, project something to the world that is not who we actually are, that I think we have to always push back against. And, we have had the benefit for our last 100 years or so that we draw on the best talent from every person around the world. The most talented person anywhere in the world wants to come to this country. And they want to come here because they know that they can raise their family here, they can make a career here, that this can be a home for them. And we are seeing that unique ability eroded by this administration, making us seem like we're not a country where you want to come to if you're a talented person somewhere else who thinks that you want to raise your family and get ahead. And so there's a middle ground here, and there's one that we have to chart. We can't have, I think, the lack of action that we saw for much of the Biden presidency. Some of that was driven by factors that were outside of the control of any president, including coming out of COVID and the collapse of countries like Venezuela, where over 6 million people had left. But we said we had to have more than that, but we also have to remember who we are and stick to our values.
Right. So you were a civil rights attorney, and I wanted to ask you, what did you think of Stephen Miller's statement that they're looking at suspending habeas corpus, which protects people from unlawful detentions? He said a lot of it depends on whether the courts do the right thing or not.
It sounds like a threat. It sounds like a threat. And I think that's because it's meant as a threat to the judiciary, to say that there will be no check on what we are trying to do. And listen, again, I come back to this. We have to have removal proceedings for folks who are here who shouldn't be. In fact, we've actually seen those numbers in some cases decrease during the Trump presidency. So we have to have removal proceedings.
Well, they're not doing the proceeding. The proceedings are just doing the removing. That's why,
They're also firing some of the people who are responsible for helping us manage and push people through the process more quickly, which is, kind of cutting off your nose to spite your face in a lot of ways. And not everyone's going to be able to stay here. But what we do and how we do it is incredibly important for us as Americans. That we have a system of due process in which people get to have their claims heard, which is not just shipped off to some prison in El Salvador, and even if we do it accidentally and say, "Whoops, we can't get you back," that's not who we are as a country, and it never has been, and it can't be who we become. And so when I hear someone like Stephen Miller say we're going to suspend habeas corpus, which has only really been done during the Civil War, and the Constitution basically lays out when it can be done in terms of times of invasion and crisis. We are not being invaded. We are not at war with ourselves. What we have is a policy issue that we can manage as Americans, consistent with the law and consistent with our values. And Stephen Miller, I don't think understands that. But I think we also know that we have a Congress that has completely ceded their Article 1 responsibilities under the Constitution. The first article of the Constitution deals with the Congress. And there's a reason why the founders made Article 1 about the Congress, because they thought that should be where the people's voices resided, and that would be a check and a balance on an executive in Article 2 that they were worried about could become a tyrant and too powerful, because we had just left a country that was led by a king and that was taxing us without representation and the whole thing. The whole structure was intended to make sure that we had these checks and balances, including the courts. And what I see is Stephen Miller there doing is threatening the courts and saying, we know the Congress isn't going to act and we can do whatever we want. And that is not our system.
Yeah. How did Democrats message, though, around the border in the next election? Because there are a lot of people who are happy to see, they may not be happy with the deportations and the fear and the way it's being carried out, but a lot of them are happy to see that the border's been sealed up. How do the Democrats message around that and make people understand that, it's going to be that they are going to continue to secure the border, that it won't just be open season again, like when it switched over from Trump to Biden?
Yeah, well, what I said before is what I really mean, is that there are common sense policies that we can put in place to both make sure that we're controlling who's coming into our country and when, and that when people need to be removed, that they are removed, but that we also don't restrict the number of talented people who want to come to our universities, who want to come to our medical schools, who want to come to our law schools, who then want to make families here and contribute to our economy here. Legal immigration has been such a huge net positive for us. And this administration we've already seen that being impacted by people being afraid of coming to this country. And so there is a middle ground. But one thing I will never put up with from my party, and what I always speak out against, is this idea that there's nothing we can do for security, that there's nothing we can do to try and make sure that we have more officers in place, that we have faster processing, that yes, we use physical barriers where necessary, that we are doing and having a serious approach to border security. We have to have that too. And that's something I've always preached. My family, my grandfather, as I said, was a customs officer working on border crossings after fighting the Navy in World War II. That's where my family grew up. Spent a lot of my childhood in a border town. So I understand what this means. But as a party, we have to make sure that when we talk about this, we're talking about border security, but we're also offering a pathway forwards on dealing with legal immigration, what we need to reform to fix a broken system that has been broken for decades, and that it's not just going to be about enforcement, but it has to also be about having a plan.
I want to talk about the elephant in the room and what they're up to. I'm talking about the Republican Party, the Senate Leadership Fund. They are the political arm of the Senate, and they are gearing up for the 2026 race already, the midterm elections. And they're doing polling, and they have decided to look at your polling to see how you fare against their potential candidates. I mean, their incumbent, John Cornyn, senator, he's in leadership. They've looked at how you fare against him. They looked at how you have polled against the Attorney General in Texas, Ken Paxton, who's really MAGA, and then Wesley Hunt. It's interesting, some of this polling. Cornyn is apparently losing to Paxton in a primary by 16 points. I guess that shouldn't be super surprising by the type of voters that come out during primaries. But yeah, I think there's a real threat that Cornyn could lose. And I'm just sort of wondering, who would you rather run against, Cornyn or Paxton?
Well,
Sorry, I'm not giving Wesley Hunt his fair due. He's at 19% according to their poll, but
yeah. Well, listen, we'll see, who they end up picking. And it does look like, from what I've seen from some of my Republican friends here in Texas, will tell me that they think that Ken Paxton is going to be the nominee for them. He is one of the most uniquely corrupt figures in not only Texas politics, but in American politics. He's somebody who was impeached by our Republican legislature because he wanted to get them to spend $3 million of the state's money helping to cover up his affair. He's somebody who I think would be uniquely harmful to our state, to our reputation, and also would be ineffective as a senator. And then we have John Cornyn, who I think has been there for so long he's forgotten who he is and what he wants to do. I don't think he stands for Texas at all anymore.
you worked on a red flag law together.
Yeah, listen,
which is part of the reason that Cornyn's being primary, by the way.
Well, listen, I know John Cornyn, and I know what he actually believes. And I know that he has, in many ways, I think, abandoned a lot of that, because here, after all these years in the Senate, after all this time in office, he's decided that the most important thing isn't sticking to what he actually believes and representing Texas to the best of his ability and to his own values, but it's just getting reelected again. And I just don't have a lot of patience for that kind of stuff. Maybe it's my football background. I really don't think that we should have career politicians like that in a lot of ways. But if you are, then you have to at least keep your focus and your commitment to the people you're representing. That there are worse things that can happen to you than losing an election. And that's what I'm seeing from John Cornyn.
Trump's approval rating in this poll has him only 2 points above water in Texas. What's going on there? I mean, you rode a blue wave in 2018. You beat Pete Sessions, congressman. Do you feel another blue wave happening again?
What I feel is that people are incredibly concerned about what's going on with this administration. That they voted for Donald Trump so they could buy groceries, not Greenland. That they need somebody who's focused on them. And what they've seen is somebody who's been focused on himself. And that they are expecting their representatives to fulfill that role as somebody who's going to look out for their constituents first, as opposed to just being a follower. Texas has a long history of independent leaders who actually look out for our state, and who, if you come to a Texan, you'll know that regardless of party affiliation, their first loyalty is going to be to Texas. And we've just gotten so far away from that. And I think folks are sick and tired of it. And so that, to me, what happens in the election is going to be dependent on so many different things. But every single day right now, I'm seeing signs that people are standing up, realizing they have to speak out, that democracy is not just about election day, but it's about all the days in between. And I do think that folks are recognizing that we're going to have a check and a balance put in place on this president, but also somebody who will look out for Texas first.
So you sound like you do have your eye on election day. Are you going to run in this race?
Well, listen, I'm not a candidate right now, and I'm just looking at it. And I'm enjoying raising my two boys, who are 4 and 6, and spending a lot of time with my family. And so I'll be making a decision this summer. But I will certainly be involved either way in making sure that we have a senator who will actually stand up for Texas and for our values, not one who I think will be a follower and who won't actually try and help deal with the issues that Texans are facing, particularly this affordability crisis that's going on here.
What's holding you back?
There's nothing holding me back. I don't have any. Listen. I mean, as I said, I am really enjoying my time with my family.
No, I just say that because, I sort of think of Texas as a bit of a white whale for Democrats. I hate to say it, but you get these really talented candidates like yourself and Beto O'Rourke. You come so close. So much money is sunk into it. I mean, your race last time, $92 million, and I wonder if sometimes it's a fool's errand, or Democrats sinking their money into a state that they're not going to win. I know you came close last time, so did Beto, but it just feels like time after time after time, Democrats spend nearly $100 million, sometimes more, and they never win the state.
Well, I think it's probably different, Tara, if you're a Texan. Okay. I really do. I'm a 4th-generation Texan. My boys were born 10 minutes from here. They're 5th-generation Texans. And when you are a Texan and you see what's happening to our state, you believe that you have to do something about it. I never have run for office because I think that, I just need to be in that role. the district I represented in Congress, as you mentioned, I ran against a 22-year incumbent Republican who nobody had even run against in the previous election. That's how I got into Congress. It wasn't just any district. It was a district where I was born and raised in, the hospital that I was born in, the high school that I went to. It's the place where I grew up. And I ran in that Republican drawn district because I felt like that congressman was not representing our district and the people that I grew up around, who gave me a chance, being raised by a single mom, to play in the NFL and do other things. And I feel the same way about our state. It's a great state that we have 30 million Texans who are just fantastic. We have so much talent, but we've not had the leadership to match that. And so in every election, what we're trying to do, particularly running against someone like a Ted Cruz or whoever's going to be their nominee in this election, is to give us the representation that I think we deserve. And we're doing everything we possibly can. And I think that there are 30 million Texans who deserve to have leadership that actually wakes up every day focused on them instead of on themselves. And we have to have a check here in this state on some of the extremism that's happening here. Otherwise, the story that we've had of success and people wanting to come here is going to die.
How do you explain, though, the fact that all of these people are leaving blue states like California and they're heading to Texas because they see it as like the new California, right? I mean, I know it's a tax haven in some ways, but like it looks like they're kind of escaping some of the Democratic policies and affordability issues.
Well, I think they're escaping for affordability, absolutely. But where are they coming? They're coming to Dallas, they're coming to Houston, they're coming to Austin, they're coming to San Antonio. All right, they're coming to some of the biggest metros, in the country. We have some great small towns as well, and they're not coming here for political reasons. If you look at the demographics of who's coming here and why they're coming, it's because they want to have more space. They want to be able to raise a family. That's good. That's something that we welcome. I don't want us to be a California where we are unaffordable, but it is getting more expensive here in Texas, and we are seeing people struggling to get by. And we do have some of the biggest inequality of any state in the country. And what we are seeing is that while we are seeing we have leadership that's only focused on kind of playing politics and circular firing squads, but there's a lot that needs to get done for us to actually move forward as a state. That a big, complicated state like ours needs to actually have leadership that's trying to work for them instead of just pursuing ideological agendas. And we actually do have a long tradition, as I said, of independent leaders like that, and across the aisle on both sides. And those are the folks that I grew up respecting and believe that we can get back to. But in a lot of ways, we have to break this cycle that we've been in, where it's just the most extreme person is going to get elected over and over and over again, because that's driving policies that are going to make the Texas story one that is not reachable for most folks.
Got it. Do you ever regret leaving your congressional seat? I mean, you must have a feeling right now of like, wow, shit's getting real weird, and you want to be out there. I mean, do you see someone like Cory Booker and what he's doing, filibustering? I think he used he claims he didn't use a catheter over 24 hours, but he didn't eat for days. Like, do you see people like that? It seems like performative to me, but he's certainly like ascending right now. His name is now up there as a 2028 candidate. People are talking about it, but like, do you think that's the right way to fight against Trump?
Cory's a friend, and so I'll say I'm really proud of Cory.
Mm-hmm.
I'll also say that I don't miss anything about being in the Congress right now, and that I think that the House of Representatives in particular is broken, and that it's been going in a direction of just dysfunction for some time. You probably remember, Tara, last Congress we went 3 weeks without a speaker. And we passed,
how could I forget?
We passed almost no legislation of note. I think they've passed 5 bills so far this year. In a country this big and complicated, you need to actually be doing and passing legislation. But we also need to be leading in different ways. And I think having folks like Cory leading in the capacity that he is important. But I don't think the answer to this crisis that we're in is going to come from Washington. And I really don't think that.
Do you think that Hakeem Jeffries is, sorry to cut you off, but like, do you think Hakeem Jeffries is doing a strong enough fight like against Trump? I mean, Johnson's done a pretty spectacular job by comparison when you think about how he's been able to like wrangle the party with only 3-vote lead right now, or 3-vote majority.
That's an interesting statement, Tara. I mean, I think it depends on what you think success is. If you think success is passing bills to help the American people, then I think Speaker Johnson has done nothing. I mean, what are they passing?
I mean, they would
They're
say
not
that
going to.
they're passing. They would say that they are passing bills. I
No,
mean,
they're
they
not
kept the
passing
gun.
anything into law, right? And
Not
they
yet.
control every lever of the Congress right now, the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and they're not passing any legislation.
Well, they kept the
And
government open. It's weird though that they passed a continuing resolution. I think even Republicans are probably like flabbergasted that they did that. But I really do want to talk about Hakeem Jeffries
yeah,
though. Like, do you think
yeah.
he is doing a good enough job in fighting against Trump? I mean, you hear a lot of people complaining about Schumer, but what about on the House side?
Hakeem has been out there, I think, doing everything he can. He's been doing a ton of podcasts, a ton of appearances. He was on the Capitol steps, with Corey, doing everything he can in a limited context, which is that in the House, when you're in the minority, there's just not a whole lot of power that you have. You do have more power in the Senate in the minority. And so I
They
think he's,
probably could have thwarted. I mean, that was a Schumer thing to thwart the continuing resolution, but sure.
yeah, I mean, the House Democrats voted against that continuing resolution. And so we can always probably be doing more. But what we're going to see is an election that's going to be coming down to the basics. It's going to come back to the kitchen table issues of folks' health care, being able to, keep food on the table and a roof over their kids' heads, send their kids to a good school. Here in Texas, we're dealing with a measles outbreak. We've got an
Yeah, it's crazy.
anti-vaxxer, running our health department and running, critical agencies. They're nominating people who are unqualified to be the Surgeon General of the United States, and we're having a measles outbreak here, and folks are looking around wondering who's going to look out for them. And so, to me, some of this political wrangling that's going on right now, I remember this point in 2017, before the election in 2018, that some of the issues that were hot button issues then were not the final issues that were the ones that decided the election in 2018 down the final stretch. I think this will be similar.
Really, what are going to be the hot button issues by then?
Yeah, well, I mean, in 2018, it ended up being about the Affordable Care Act and defending folks' health care. And I think in this election, I think it's going to be about the economy and about the affordability crisis that we've had, about the housing shortage that we've had, the fact that they're now going after student loan borrowers again, that people are having a hard time getting by, that this self-induced trade war has significantly impacted our economy. The just everything that's going on is going to have a negative impact. And we're coming out of COVID in a time when folks were still worried about affordability and about being able to provide for their family. And this is something that I grew up this way because my mom and I were watching every single penny, being raised by a public school teacher who was raising me on her own. And so I understand this, and I know that we have to have folks who are talking about these issues. And I think that's what it's going to come down to in the end.
Do you think that the Democrats should impeach Trump in the next Congress?
I really don't like those kind of questions, and I
Why
do think,
not?
yeah, because I mean, listen, I voted on impeachment twice. I take it very seriously, and I take it, on a case by case basis, consistent with what I think is my constitutional duty, right? And I think it's not about politics and it's not about projections, and so I don't think that there serves a lot of utility to just say like, should we in the next Congress do something like that? What I do
Do you think
think,
he's done anything that's impeachable so far?
well, listen,
You're a
I,
lawyer.
I,
I mean, you probably have
yeah,
thought about
no,
that.
listen, I think that I see violations every single day that would, in any presidency in the past, would have been the biggest scandal of that entire presidency. I mean, just
Fair
right now, I
enough.
just finished reading this article about a $400 million gift
I was going to ask
from
you
the
about that one. The
yeah
plane
from
from
the Qataris.
Qatar.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I was on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Anybody who's on that committee can tell you the Qataris are always trying to buy influence, whether it's in Europe or around the world. They're always trying to buy
I think
influence.
they
This is
bought the
their
city
MO.
center in DC where
That's
there's a
right.
Gucci store.
This is what they do. I mean, this is a well-known playbook for them. They
Oh,
understand
yeah. They
corruption.
own France, basically,
Yeah,
right?
they understand corruption, right? They get
Right.
it. And to me, what we have to have is an actual functioning legislative branch. I mean, it's insane to me that everything we're seeing, whether it's the tariffs or this, I don't even know what to call it, emolument from Qatar, that it's acting like we don't have a Congress. They've passed no legislation. They've provided no oversight. They've not stepped in to do anything, even when their own laws have been broken, laws that the Congress passed or the funds that were appropriated by the Congress. They're like, it doesn't matter. It's like, well, why did you run for office then if you're just going to fly off to DC for 4 days a week and then just let the president do whatever they want. That's not the system of government
But
that we
I
have.
get the sense that they're nervous. I mean, that's what Murkowski said. Lisa Murkowski, the senator from Alaska, she's moderate. She's like, my colleagues are paranoid. They're terrified of standing up to Trump. And like, I've heard that privately myself. I'm sure you have.
No, I haven't. I have a friend who
They could be primaried. I mean, look at John Cornyn. He signed the red flag law with you about gun, trying to make sure that extremists don't get their hands on guns. And now he's going to get primaried by Paxton.
Well, he did that after we had a mass shooting in Uvalde in which a bunch of elementary school kids were murdered. Right. I think it was the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And if you lose an election over it, then isn't that what the point of being in the seat was?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not for career politics. I'm not here for career politics.
This is what I'm saying is the problem with folks who think their career is more important than the constitutional role they have, right? Is it really that great to think, I can get 6 more years to then be ignored by the president?
I mean, these people want to die in office. I just looked this up the other day. Grassley's in his 90s right now. Right. Chuck Grassley, a senator from Ohio.
And we have a gerontocracy. I mean, we have a gerontocracy of people who've been there forever, who think that the only thing that matters is that they get 2 or 6 more years. And then they're not going to say anything. If anything, will put that at risk.
By the way, how do you feel about David Hogg? I mean, poor guy. Looks like they're trying to get rid of him at the DNC.
Don't get me started on the DNC.
Oh, really? I mean, it does seem like it's kind of a back-end way to get rid of David Hogg. They're basically saying that they have to do a revote on his vice chair position on some technicality about the gender of the candidates. I mean, when they tried to explain this to me, my head exploded.
Yes. If you spend any time reading it, you will fall asleep. Yes. No. No.
You support him? Do you think it's right what they're doing? I mean, or just in general, like, do you support his idea that like people who have been in their positions for too long, that don't put up the fight, that essentially, without being an ageist, but is ageism in a way, he's saying they're too old. Do you think that they should be primaried?
See, that's different to me, and I don't think you should force people out of positions because they're doing things. If they got elected into it, to me, they were elected into it, right?
What about just supporting primary challengers that will take them on?
No, but I think what I often see is a difference. That's different than saying, if you're not doing your job, then we're going to get rid of you, right? To me, that has to be what we try and do in every election, regardless of party, right? Is if you're not doing the job, we're going to come after you. What I see sometimes is that they say, well, if we think that you're too moderate, then we're going to come after you in your party. That's different. An intra-party.
I don't think he's doing that, though. He's going after
I don't
blue
really know
seats.
exactly, but that's what I often see when people talk about, we're going to go after the people who are, I don't know what the terminology they would use, but what they really mean is we don't think they're as progressive as we'd like them to be sometimes. That might not be this case.
Yeah.
That's often what I've seen to be the case. And that, to me, that kind of purifying, that is really negative for the party, because we have to be some party that has different viewpoints and then has moderates and has people who can appeal to Republicans and former Republicans. That's the way I represented my district. And that's what I think we have to have that in order to have a governing majority, but also to be, I think, to stay in touch with where the American people are, because most people are not that ideologically pure. Most people don't wake up thinking just in partisan terms. They think in terms of values and who's on my side and who's on my family's side. And that's what I think we have to always kind of keep our focus on.
Do you think the party should maybe set its own limits in terms of like incumbents, how long they can stay, some sort of term limits, you could say?
Well, I've always been like someone who looks at term limits and thinks, first, let's make sure that we have a functioning democracy where we can vote people out who are no longer doing the job, because there are people who have been in office for a long time who are still incredibly effective. And I don't see people saying, for example, that John Lewis at the end of his career in life, that he needed to go, that he was no longer doing a good job, because he was incredibly effective still, and his experience and his voice of having experienced the civil rights movement then led him to be a moral leader that we would be remiss to say you got to go, just because we got some arbitrary rule. But there are people who are clearly, and I've seen this, But
like then you have Clyburn, who was like, Joe Biden should keep running, never drop out, Joe Biden. Like,
well, there are others.
That's the flip side. Congressman Clyburn,
Well, no, listen, we're not talking about. There are others though who I see, and I think, why are you still?
Why can't we talk about that? I mean, that's why Trump is in office right now. Is that there were elder statesmen in the Democratic Party, And they decided that he should stay in office, that there should be no challengers, that people like Dean Phillips would be shunned and treated poorly, and like that they shouldn't have a primary process until it was too late. And then they were like, oh, what are we gonna do?
Well, I mean, I think that we did have a changeover in who our nominee was. That you would not see something similar happen on the Republican side with Donald Trump. They can't even say that him taking a $400 million gift is inappropriate from the Qataris. So I do think that let's be honest, we did then have a new nominee. The sitting president did not run for re-election. Did it
Took
take
him
too
6
long?
weeks, though.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of journalism coming out right now that some of this was kept from some of us that we didn't see.
I mean, people could see it with their own
Uh,
eyes.
well, I think
2/3 of the American
a little more
public said that he
complicated than
was
that.
too old to run again. 2/3 in poll after poll after poll for years.
Yeah.
For years, not like after the debate, before the debate.
Yeah.
And
Well,
no one wanted
listen,
to listen.
if you want to talk about thinking that we have a gerontocracy and that we've got our leaders need to get younger and more connected with the people and with the current times, I will completely agree with that.
I mean, you're a millennial. You're down for the fight, right?
I'm an elder millennial. Yeah.
Elder. You're 42. Okay.
Yeah. That's what they told me is that I'm an elder millennial. Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess I don't know. I'll just be a medium millennial. My brother's technically a millennial, and he's 27.
No, I won't ask you how old you are, but
Yeah. Don't ask me how old I am. Very impolite.
Yeah, that's very impolite. Well,
I'm 37. It's okay.
Okay, so we're the same kind of generation. Yeah.
Same-ish, yeah. Okay, well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting, though, because, like, it does seem, though, that there are some voices in your party who tend to be younger, and then weirdly one that's older who are the loudest voices, who are getting the most enthusiasm right now. It's AOC, it's Jasmine Crockett from Texas, and it's Bernie Sanders, What do you think about their model of democratic leadership? Like, is that the one that's going to usher in the next wave in 2026?
I just think we need it all. I just think we need it all. I think we need to have energy, that we need to bring young people back into the party. Then we need to talk about change and the future and how this is not working and how we recognize that the status quo is unacceptable, that we're not here to defend the status quo. We're here to build a better future for you and your family. We're not going to try to go back to how it was. We want to make it better, right? That's good. But I also think and know that we have to win in places that we have not traditionally won, that we have to reach out to and grow the party, that the kind of ideological purity tests that we've sometimes engaged in the party are incredibly harmful to us as I see it, that we have to be a big tent party where everybody's welcome, whether it's Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, both friends of mine, or whether it's Bernie and Alex, right? We have to approach it from all of those fronts. And so to me, we need all of that. And I saw some of this same dynamic play out in 2017, and in race after race, when it finally came down to it, who flipped the 40 seats that got us the House majority in 2018? People like me, and who picked up seats in the Senate. It was people who were running on let's build a broad coalition of folks that's not just purely ideological, one where everybody can feel welcome, and that to me is what our focus has to be.
Okay. I do want to ask you about talking to men. Democrats are having a hard time sounding authentic, speaking to men. You are obviously a former NFL player. You bring on, what's the advice you would give to them? I also would be curious what you think about talking to Latino voters too, but let's start with men.
Yeah, I mean, I think that first of all, when it comes to talking to young men, and this is something I spent my entire career in football, as a linebacker, as captain of the team, leading young men and leading towards a goal, is you have to stand for something. And I think we've had an issue to where it just seems like you can be so careful in trying to campaign and talk to folks that you end up coming across to particularly young men as that you don't believe in anything. And it doesn't have to be purely ideological in a sense. It doesn't have to be that you're just the most far left. It has to be that you believe in what you're saying, that you're going to fight for it, and that you understand what's going on in the lives of young men in this country. And the data shows us that young men are struggling, that they are doing worse in school, they're having worse economic outcomes, that they're putting off starting families till later because they can't afford it. There's a sense that they can't provide. And we have to
I'm like,
speak to that.
wah, wah, wah. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, but like
It's not,
women are
no,
eating
you're
their
wrong.
lunch. Like, I hate to say it.
Well, it's not just that.
Uh,
It's not just competition. It is also that we have to make sure that what we're offering in this economy and in our educational opportunities is something that young men can take advantage of, and that they have examples, and that they have folks that they can follow into these pathways. And what I've seen is that we've had a very toxic manosphere emerge. One that is the exact opposite of the
well, it's the
values
one where
that I
they're the
was taught.
victims all the time.
Right, and that is the exact opposite of a constructive approach to what can we do better, and how can we make sure that as we're continuing to push for gender equity, and as we're continuing to push for a more equal society, that we don't leave young men behind in our educational pathways and in our economy. And so we have to do both. And if you think that we can't, then I'll just disagree. But I also will never agree that we should not continue to pursue gender equity. You mentioned at the beginning of this interview how I talked a lot about the abortion ban here in Texas and the horrible
Yeah.
effects it's having on Texas women and Texas families. I'll never stop fighting for that. But we also have to fight for and talk specifically about how we're going to address some of the issues facing young men. We're going to help them make sure they can have pathways into being able to protect and provide for their families. Otherwise, we will see them continue to pursue some of these toxic figures who are coming along promising things that they're not going to deliver, and then just making them more and more disenchanted.
There's also an element to these toxic figures that they're embracing, that they are provocative, right? They're saying the things that they're not allowed to say because of cancel culture. And like, do you think that perhaps that the cancel culture has come back to bite Democrats, and that's part of the reason why young men are thinking, you know what, they're not that cool anymore, Democrats. I'd rather, be a Republican, or I feel like they're more in line with my values. And my values are, I should be able to talk and chat with my friends and make jokes that are maybe a little off color. And I can't have to, I don't want to, and it doesn't necessarily be like off color. They just feel like they're tiptoeing around, that they're constantly offending people just by being who they are.
Yeah. Well, nobody wants to be a part of a preachy party. Nobody wants to be, preached to and told how everything they do is wrong. Mm-hmm. But that also doesn't mean that you got to go around saying racial slurs and slurs for women and ethnic slurs. That doesn't mean that.
Right. It's gone to another extreme.
Right. And so like when I was in football, listen, we would talk pretty straight to each other. Okay.
Yeah.
But if somebody in my
locker room talk.
Right. But if somebody in my locker room was talking about a woman in some of the terms that I'll hear some of these manosphere figures talking about them, then we would have an issue. Yeah. And we would have to fight that out until the person understood, you're not going to be talking like that around me. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so there is a balance. But I do think that, nobody wants to feel like they're a part of something where they don't know how to communicate in it, where they feel like people are going to come down on them. When I talked to you about the struggles that young men are going through, it seemed like you kind of didn't, you were like, wow, but that's also something true.
I hear it from my brother. I mean, he's 27 and I'm like, we were just talking about like his bachelor party where he's going to go with his friends. He's getting married. And he was like, well, they can't afford to go anywhere. And I was like, they're going to go to Atlantic City, which I find to be like extremely depressing, having grown up in New Jersey. It's just like really dark. Like you don't want to go to Atlanta.
New Jersey, so I hear you.
Probably, it's just not a great place. And he was just saying like, yeah, well, none of my friends can afford to do anything else. And he was just telling me like about how like hard their lives are. And I'm just like, there's a part of me that's like, I feel bad for them, but then there's also a part of me that thinks like, well, just like get your shit together. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. Am I being a hardo?
No, I just think that they're
like a bunch of white dudes. I'm like, just get your shit together. You went to college. Like, I don't get it.
I think that a lot of the structure of the modern education system and our economic system is not geared towards some of the things that young men naturally have, and that we have downgraded and downplayed the dignity of work, the dignity of getting into profession.
I mean, my dad's an electrician. There's nothing wrong. Like people can go into trades.
For example, when I was going to high school here in Dallas, we no longer had shop class. Mm-hmm. We no longer had, metalworking and woodworking, right? That wasn't an option anymore.
Yeah.
Because they're telling everybody to go to 4-year schools. Well, not everybody's going to go to 4-year school, right?
Right.
You
They're
know,
putting
and a lot of my
people
classmates
into it,
didn't.
maybe. That's
Right. And if
horrible.
I didn't play football, I wouldn't have been able to afford that. I had to go to community college and work my way through,
Hmm.
right? And so, I just think we've moved away from talking about some of these things. And the policy result is that we have the data shows a generation of young men who are in crisis that we have to address from a policy perspective. Now, I don't think we have to address that by reducing gender equity or by saying we're going to make it harder for women. It's
Yeah.
one of you grow the pie for everyone and it will raise the votes for
I
everyone.
think it's hard for people to imagine, though, that when they're competing against women, minority, you know what I mean? It's harder when you're competing against more people for the same job. That I think there's a
Yeah,
sense that,
I mean, I
like,
think that what we're trying to do is grow more jobs, and that's what I think.
right. I mean, that would be
It's
the
kind of the
goal.
difference between the idea of scarcity and that there can be more, right?
Yeah.
And if someone else gets a job, it doesn't mean that they took your job, right? What we should say is we're going to create another job for you too, and we have those jobs and those job openings. We just can't fill them, right? And so I would always have employers here in Dallas tell me that they can't get enough skilled work. And I'd say, well, what are you doing working with our high schools? Because we got a lot of kids there who are going to graduate, who are going to be looking for jobs. We need to
Right.
marry these two together much better. And so, I think that this is something we can address, but it's not attacking DEI and saying if a woman's in a job, then she's got to be fired. That's not how we're going to do it, right? That will just cut our productivity and end up with unqualified people in positions they shouldn't have. That's what I see in the Trump administration, right? But what we can do, I think, is raise the tide for everyone, try and address some of the specific issues that young men are facing, and do that in a way that helps everybody.
Yeah. Well, good luck to young men. Because they become leaders one day, right? Or podcast hosts. So,
Yeah, what's a group of men gathering, right? A podcast, yeah.
yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. All right, this was great. Thank you so much for your time. I'll keep an ear out for your decision. If you want to announce right now, you have about 2 more seconds your candidacy. But I've got a feeling that since the Republicans are already polling you, they're onto something.
Well, they're polling, they're saying that the guy that they think is going to win is down to me. So,
Yeah,
but thank you for having me on, Tara. I
of course.
appreciate you, and let's
Okay,
stay in touch.
for sure. Thank you. Thanks again for tuning into the Tara Palmeri show. I thought about it and I realized that I sounded pretty insensitive when I was talking about the struggles of younger men. I'm probably doing what we all do when we look down on the generations after us. We had it just as hard, I mean, I did graduate during the Great Recession in 2008, and it wasn't easy. I graduated early to take an hourly job, working crappy hours and with no benefits, and it took me and my friends a long time to get back on track. I was just sort of saying, I know what it's like, but probably in a very insensitive way. And I don't mean to take anything away from the people who are hurting right now, because it is such an uncertain time. I mean, sometimes I think to myself, am I crazy for self-funding a media company? Probably. But yeah, we're all going through stuff and I want to hear from you. So send me a voice note. You can send it to tara@tarapalmeri.com. I can play it on the show. You can send me an email. We can keep this conversation going. I want to know what you're going through. You can also support my independent journalism and sign up for my exclusive reporting by going to tarapalmeri.com. That's TARAPALMERI.com. You can sign up for my newsletter, The Red Letter. You can also watch this show on YouTube at Tara Palmeri. You can follow the show, you can rate it, subscribe, comment, share it with your friends. I'll be back again this week.